Daf Yomi Tractate Zevachim, page 44a, or 44 in general, 44a, and maybe 44b, but they might be two separate. So just page 44, which is actually in truth the 43rd page, and starting on 43b, which is in truth the 42nd page, the bottom it says "I bachilas meiser," and if the brisa is referring to the eating of the second tithe, this too is difficult. Now we're on the top of 44a with the words "Im lo nemru chamurot hayiti omer al chamurot bamita." Okay, top of 44a. If the stringent case of impurity imparted by a corpse were not stated, but only the lenient case of the impurity of a creeping animal, Hayiti Omer, al chamurot b'mita hamatum asheres kasya, mida'in minadin yelkinidoin. But only if the stringent case of impurity imparted by a corpse were not stated, but only the lenient case of the impurity of a creeping animal, I would say that the punishment in the stringent case is that of death at the hand of heaven. Rather, halacha in the case of impurity imparted by a corpse would be derived from the halacha in a case of the impurity by a creeping animal by a means of an a fortiori inference, and it is sufficient for the conclusion that emerges from an a fortiori inference to be like its source, in this case, that one is liable to be flogged for the violation of a prohibition and no more. Amar ze'iri kalois tumas sheretz chamurois tumas meis v'ochikomar ilu nemar tumas sheretz v'nemar ma'aser truma lo nemra tumas meis seiti oimer kalois. Zeiri says, indeed, the lenient case is referring to the impurity of a creeping animal, and the stringent case is referring to impurity imparted by a corpse. And this is what the Braita is saying. If the impurity of a creeping animal was stated, and it was stated that one who eats second tithe while impure, with such impurity has violated a prohibition, and one who partakes of teruma in that state is liable to be punished with death at the hand of heaven. And the impurity imparted by a corpse was not stated in this context, I would say as follows. The lenient level of impurity, that of a creeping animal, with regard to food with lenient halachot. The second tithe involves the violation of a prohibition, and with regard to food with stringent halachot, truma, it involves liability to be punished with death at the hand of heaven. Umid kalos ala chamuros b'miso chamuros nami ala kalos b'miso lekach nemu chamuros. Zeiri continues his explanation of the Braita. And from the fact that the lenient level of impurity, that of a creeping animal, with regard to food with stringent halachot truma involves liability to be punished with death at the hand of heaven, it may be inferred that also in the analogous case of the stringent level of impurity imparted by a corpse, with regard to food with lenient halachot, there is liability to be punished with death at the hand of heaven. Therefore, the stringent level of impurity imparted by a corpse was stated with regard to second tithe, which has lenient halachot to teach that even if one contracted impurity from a corpse, he has violated only a prohibition for eating second tithe and is not liable to be punished with death at the hand of heaven. Kol sheyesh lo matirin bein lo adam bein lo mizbeach chayovin olo mishum pigul. The Mishnah teaches, with regard to any item that has permitting factors, either for consumption by a person or for burning on the altar, one is liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition of pigul, The Gemara cites a verse and a related Braita. The verse states, "And if any be at all eaten of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering on the third day, it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be imputed to him who sacrifices it. It shall be pigul, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity." Leviticus 7:18. The Braita first demonstrates that the halacha of pigul applies not only to a peace offering with regard to which it is stated in the Torah, but to all offerings. The sages taught in Braisa, "Oy no mevi ela ki yotzu b'shlamim, v'shlamim yichodim nechol l'shnei yamim v'layla echad, av kol nechol l'shnei yamim v'layla echad." The sages taught in Braisa, or perhaps the halacha of pigul extends only to an offering that is limited to peace offerings, just as peace offerings are notable in that they are eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So too, the halacha of pigul applies to any offering that is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Ne'echal liyom v'layla minayin, tamid omar mibesar, kol sheshirin sheshirov ne'echalin, oy no she'en sheshirov ne'echalin minayin tamid omar zevachim. But as for an offering that is eaten only for 1 day, meaning the day the offering is sacrificed and the following night, for example, a sin offering, guilt offering, and firstborn offering, from where is it derived that the halacha of pigul applies to this offering as well? The verse states, "Of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering," which teaches that the status of pigul can apply to any offering whose remainder of meat is eaten after its sacrificial portions have been offered on the altar. The Braita asks, with regard to a burnt offering whose remainder of meat is not eaten as it is burned in its entirety on the altar, from where is this halacha derived? The verse states sacrifice, which includes any offering that is slaughtered. Minayin l'rabbi soifois taminachois achani ma'abei lo shemen shemitzoyu tavinoma asherhem makdishim li. The right to ask, from where is it derived to include bird offerings, for example, doves or pigeons, which are not slaughtered but whose napes of their necks are pinched, and meal offerings, until I include even the log of oil that accompanies the guilt offering of a recovered leper. The verse states, with regard to the consumption of consecrated food in a state of ritual purity. The verse states, with regard to the consumption of consecrated food in a state of ritual purity, that they separate themselves from the sacred items of the children of Israel, which they consecrate to me, and that they do not profane my holy name. Leviticus 22, verse 2. Okay. Wow. It's a big daf. Very holy. Iniquity. Alright. So the Braita clarifies its derivation. The halacha that the prohibition of notar applies to all these offerings is derived through a verbal analogy of profanation in the context of notar. And if anything remains until the third day, it shall be burnt in fire. And anyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned the sacred name of the Lord, sacred item of the Lord. Leviticus 19, 6-8. And profanation stated in the verse discussing ritual impurity, and that they do not profane my holy name. And the halacha that pigul applies to all these offerings is subsequently derived through a verbal analogy of iniquity in the context of pigul and iniquity stated in the verse discussing notar. With regard to pigul, the verse states it shall be pigul, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity. Leviticus 7:18. And with regard to notar, it is stated in the aforementioned verse, and anyone who shall eat it shall bear his iniquity. A brief break. Right. לא הם מלחמה שלומים מיוחדים שיש להם מתירים בין האדם בין למזבח אף כל שיש לו מתירים בין לאדם בין למזבח הבנה בשום פירוד. The Braita asks, and since the verse eventually includes all items, even meal offerings, and the log of the oil of a leper, now one can ask, why does the verse state pigul specifically with regard to peace offerings? The Braita answers, this serves to tell you that the offering must be similar to peace offerings in the following way. Just as peace offerings are notable in that they have permitting factors, either for consumption by a person or for burning on the altar, so too with regard to any item that has permitting factors, either for a person or for the altar, one is liable for eating it due to violation of the prohibition of pigul. Ha'oila dama matir es pisara l'mizbeach. The Braita specifies, with regard to the burnt offering, its blood renders its flesh permitted to be burned on the altar, and its hide to be used by the priests. Dama matir es pisara l'mizbeach v'ayir l'kohanim. Oy las oif damamatir es besor es beach katos oif damamatir es besor le kohanim hori manis rofim useir manis rofim damamatir es emuren likrav. With regard to the bird burnt offerings, its blood renders its flesh and its skin permitted due to be burned on the altar. With regard to the bird sin offering, its blood renders its flesh permitted but for consumption by the priest. With regard to bulls that are burned, for example, the bull sacrifice for an unwitting communal transgression, and goats that are burned, for example, the goat sacrifice for an unwitting communal sin of idol worship, their blood renders their sacrificial portions permitted to be sacrificed on the altar. Limurim. Emurihem. Umoitziani es hakometz es alavoina piaketoires uminchas kohanim uminchas kohen Mashiach uminchas nisochim v'adam. And I exclude, via the analogy to peace offerings, the handful of a meal offering, the frankincense, the incense, the meal offering of priests, the meal offering of the anointed priest, the meal offering brought with the libations that accompany animal offerings, and the blood. All these do not have an item that renders them permitted either for a person or for the altar. Rabbi Shimon Omer, מה שלומים מיוחדים שיש בו המזבח החיצון לחייב עליו, אף כל שישנן המזבח החיצון לחייב עליו משום פיגול. יצאו פרים הנשרפים וסירים הנשרפים, הואיל שאין על מזבח החיצון כשלומים, אין חייב עליו משום פיגול. The Braita concludes, or Shimon says, that the fact that the verse specifies peace offerings as the standard use of pigul teaches just as peace offerings are notable in that they have a permitting factor, the sacrifice on the external altar, meaning their blood, and one is liable for eating them due to violation of the prohibition of pigul. So too with regard to any item that has a permitting factor, that is sacrificed on the external altar, one is liable for eating due to the violation of the prohibition of pigul. This serves to exclude bulls that are burned and goats that are burned, since their blood is not presented on the external altar of peace offerings. One is not liable for eating them due to violation of the prohibition of pigul. Amar. Yehoshua ma'ninu b'chol d'nechal shnei yomi v'lein echad b'may ibameh matinu yikal nefach. The Gemara analyzes the price. The master said, perhaps the halacha of pigul extends only to an offering that is similar to peace offerings. What is this offering that is similar to a peace offering, but is not included in the category of peace offerings? The Gemara answers the reference is to a firstborn offering, which is eaten for 2 days and 1 night, as is a peace offering. The Gemara raises a difficulty, but by what hermeneutical principle is the halacha of the firstborn offering derived? If it is by the hermeneutical principle of what do we find, with regard to the principle of inductive reasoning involving comparison between cases that includes similar details, meaning since the peace offering and firstborn offering are similar with regard to the time designated for their eating, pigul status should apply to each. This can be refuted. The Gemara clarifies the refutation. What is notable about peace offerings? They are notable in that they require placing hands on the head of the offering, libations, and the waving of the breast and the thigh. None of these apply in the case of a firstborn offering. Rather, the halacha that pigul status applies to a firstborn offering is derived through the hermeneutical principle of a generalization and a detail and a generalization in the following verse. And if any be at all eaten of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings on the 3rd day, it shall not be accepted. Leviticus 7:18. The terms "and if any" and "be at all eaten" are generalizations, while the words "the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering" constitutes a detail. The flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering constitute a detail, according to the hermeneutical principle of a generalization and a detail and a generalization, kal prat uklal. In such a case, one includes any item that is similar to the detail, and therefore one includes the firstborn offering. פרט ביניהם ודונם בכלל ופרט. The Gemara raises a difficulty. These two phrases are generalizations that are adjacent to one another, which means that this is not an instance of a generalization and a detail and a generalization, as they are not in that order. Rava said the hermeneutical principle applies even in this case. As they say in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, in every place that you find two generalizations that are adjacent to one another, cast the detail that is written afterward between them and interpret them in the manner of a generalization and a detail and a generalization. Consequently, this verse is considered to state a generalization and a detail and a generalization. דברי רבי מאיר הם בספר מוציאני מנחת נסכים בידם עצל רבנון. The Braita continues. The Braita teaches, until I include even the log of oil of a leper. The Gemara asks, and according to whose opinion is this ruling? The Gemara answers that it is according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir and the Chadash. And with regard to the log of oil of the leper, was liable for consuming it due to the violation of the prohibition of pigul. If the guilt offering that this oil accompanied became pigul, this is a statement of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara raises a difficulty. Say the latter clause, and I exclude the meal offering brought with the libations that accompany animal offering in the blood, as they do not have a permitting factor. Here we arrive at the opinion of the rabbis who dispute the ruling of Rabbi Meir. Tanya, for we learn the name Brisa, this behema chayav and rabbi shubhigu. מפני שאדם הזבח מתיר לקרב דברי מאיר, אמרו לו, הלא אדם מביא הזבח היום מסכים מכאן עד 10 ימים, אמרו להן, אף אני לא אמרתי, אלא בבוין הזבח. The Gemara elaborates, as it is taught in other brachos with regard to the libations of an animal offering, one is liable for consuming them due to violation of the prohibition of pigul, as the blood of the offering renders them permitted to be offered on the altar. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. The rabbi said to him that a person may bring his offerings today and the accompanying libations from now, even until even 10 days later. Evidently, the blood of the offering does not render the libations permitted. Rabbi Meir said to them, I too spoke only about libations that come to be sacrificed together with the offering. If so, the Braita under discussion represents two conflicting opinions. Amar Rav Yosef, Rabbi Yosef said, Hamani Rabbi, Amar Log Mishem Jumsar, Matnoesu Shole, Umid Notav Shaule Mimat Notav Mipalgile. Rav Yosef said, by the way, Rav Yosef equals 358, which is Gematria Mashiach. Just a little bit of detailed information. A little trivia, I should say. Rav Yosef said, in accordance with his opinion is this ruling. Yosef is 156 and Rav is 202. 202 and 156 is 358. In accordance with his opinion is ruling that even the log of oil of a leper is included in the prohibition of pigul, in accordance with the opinion of Yehoshua Nasi, who agrees with the rabbis that the libations of an animal offering are not permitted by the blood of the offering, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says with regard to the log of oil of a leper that it is not the blood of the guilt offering that renders it permitted, rather the placement of its oil for the Lord. Leviticus 14:16. Render the remainder of the oil permitted to be eaten by the priests. And from the fact that the placements of its oil rendered the oil permitted, by the same token, the placements of its oil rendered pigul. Meaning, if the oil was placed with the intent that the priest should consume its remainder, the following day, one who consumes the oil is liable for consuming pigul. Tanya, the Gemara cites the source for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's opinion, as it is taught in a Braita with regard to the log of oil of a leper, who derives benefit from it is liable for misusing consecrated property if he derives benefit from it any point after it has been consecrated in a sacred vessel, until the blood of the leper's guilt offering is sprinkled. At this stage, the oil is permitted to the priests, and therefore the prohibition against misusing property consecrated to the temple no longer applies to it. Once the blood has been sprinkled, one may not derive benefit from the oil ab initio or rabbinic law, as it must still be placed on the leper's right ear, thumb, and big toe. But if the one derived benefit from it, he is not liable for misuse. Rabbi Omer, Mo'alina chitim matnosav, Yehoshua says, one who derives benefit from the oil is liable for misusing consecrated property until the priest places his own placements. Meaning, until the oil is sprinkled 7 times toward the sanctuary, as these sprinklings render the remainder of the oil permitted to the priests. And the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi agree that consumption of the log of oil is prohibited until the priest places the 7 placements, meaning sprinklings of oil toward the sanctuary, and performs the placing of oil on the leper's thumb and big toe. Amru hakami de Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Gav Rabbi Yosef Lema Hakamilta. They said this statement before Rabbi Yirmiyah in Eretz Yisrael, whereupon he said, Rabbi Yirmiyah said, would a great man such as Rav Yosef say such a matter, that the sprinkling of the oil renders the rest of the oil pigul? Just to continue the idea, let's move on to the top of 44b now. הרי לא גבה מפני עצמה, לכולי הממת נויס אפשרו ולא מפרגל דתני לו, כשמן שם סערה, חייב עליו משום פיגור מפני שאדם מתירו לבהונוס דברי רבי מאיר. But there is the case of the log of oil that is brought by itself, meaning where the leper brings it after he has sacrificed his offerings. There everyone agrees that its placements render the remainder of the oil permitted to the priests, and yet they do not render the oil as pigul, as it is stated in the Braita. With regard to the log of oil of a leper, one is liable for consuming it due to violation of the prohibition of pigul, as the blood of the offering renders it permitted to be placed on the thumb and big toe of the leper. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir.